Hey everyone, so today we're talking about lenses. I'm going to be going over the lenses that I like to use for CK Productions videos, for weddings, and other types of films and personal projects that I might do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you like lenses too, right? Yeah.
Now some people out there that are more cinematographers might have a lot more lenses than I have, but I have about 5 different lenses that I like to use. I use them for different purposes. That's what we're going to go over today, right Mooney?
Yeah.
But before we get into it, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, hit that notification bell. I post videos here twice a week, Thursdays and Fridays. Sorry, Thursdays and Sundays. So it's important when you're picking out lenses to think about what you need those lenses for. The main thing you have to consider with lenses is if you want to use a zoom lens or a prime lens. There's always so many trucks who drive by this window. So zoom lenses will have a range of different focal lengths. And focal length is a number that corresponds with how zoomed in the shot is, sort of. You have something like zoom lenses that have a range of something to something, and you can zoom between those different ranges. But that sounds great, you know. I can cover a bunch of different ranges with just one different lens. The trade-off with lenses like this is the aperture is not gonna be as wide as something like prime lens. So prime lens is a lens at a fixed focal length. Might be 35 millimeters, 85 millimeters, 50 millimeters, or whatever. It can only be at that focal length. But typically these prime lenses are a little bit sharper and they can open their apertures a little bit more wider. So you can get that nice, clean, shallow depth of field shots that look very pretty. And everyone's gonna be like, whoa, you're an awesome filmmaker, you're amazing. And just like, I just use prime lenses, you know, that's all I do. So for my setup, I have a variety of couple zoom lenses and a few prime lenses. So going through the list here, the first lens I'm going to talk about and the one that I use most often is actually the lens I'm shooting with right now. That's going to be my Canon 24 to 105 millimeter lens. And this is the camera that came with this kit lens when I got the 6D here. And that's the lens that I use for a variety of different situations. I can cover a lot of different range and I can do it fairly quickly without having to switch lenses out. I'll use this mostly if I'm shooting outside for a CK video or if I'm shooting outside for a wedding. It gives that flexibility for me if I need to go from shot to shot to shot. I can do it pretty quickly without having to switch lenses. And normally, because if I'm outside, I don't necessarily have to have a very wide aperture. And it goes down to f4, which is honestly a decent aperture to work with. It's good for simple setups, and it's good for, you know, a lot of different shooting, mostly outside, I'd say. When I'm shooting inside, or if I'm trying to get some specialized shots, I'll go to my prime lenses here. I mostly use these prime lenses for a lot of wedding shoots, because a lot of wedding shoots, you might be inside for receptions or for ceremonies in kind of low lighting situations. So I'm gonna need that aperture to be pretty wide open. And this lens here I use is the 35 millimeter lens. And the 35 millimeter lens is really great, especially with a camera with a super 35 millimeter sensor like my C200. It's a good kind of medium length shot that can cover a variety of different situations. And since it's a prime, it can open up to f2 so that I can bring a lot of different light in, and since I'm still wide, and it looks very pretty. Don't always use this for a lot of CK shoots or stuff I'm moving fast because I don't want to switch the lens out too much. If you're working with something like a wide aperture and stuff like that, it might sometimes be a little bit difficult to keep your focus, especially if you're doing a shot with like a lot of movement, like we do for CK Productions. We want to make sure that our camera is as focused as possible, and sometimes it's a little more difficult if you're making your aperture very wide. And if we're not making our aperture wide on this, there's no reason to really use a lens like this. I would just use something like my Zoom 24 to 105. I would just use that without having to switch it out. Very good for instances where I need that extra light. Since it's small, I can make my setup a little bit more, you know, lighter. My other prime lens, I have it connected to my 6D right now. This is my 85 millimeter lens. It's very similar to this one in terms of build, but it's the 85 millimeter version. A lot of the similar reasons that I use this 35, I use this 85, but this is just more telephoto. So if I'm shooting weddings and I want to get more close-up shots of people, I'll go and switch to this lens here. It's got all the same advantages that this lens has here, but it's just a telephoto lens. I'll sometimes use this for some, you know, CK shoots where there's not a lot of movement because I can get nice telephoto shots with this. And it's another lens that can open up to, I think, 1.8 actually. Because it's even zoomed in more, it's got more of a stronger shallow depth of field look. And for my third prime lens, I don't actually have it here with me today, but that prime lens is a 14 millimeter. It's not a Canon lens, it's actually a Rokinon cinema lens. The Rokinon lenses are good because they're nice prime lenses and they're nice what they call cinema grade lenses, but they're also not that expensive. They are manual lenses, so you don't have autofocus or electronic aperture or anything, but it's not something that you really need for something as wide as 14mm. I'd use that 14mm lens for, mostly for CK shoots where there's a lot of action in it. Like for a lot of fight scenes, I'll use that because when you're moving around with 14mm, the motion of the camera is exaggerated a lot, and the motion of the arms moving or things flying around is a lot more exaggerated. And I like using that 14mm. It's the newest lens that I've gotten, and I like using it for a lot of those situations. And lastly, out of the group here, I have this zoom lens here. This is a 70 to 200mm Canon L series lens. And this lens, I primarily use this lens for photography. I don't use it a lot for filmmaking. I don't use it a lot for CK or weddings or anything because I don't necessarily have need for something like this. For those, the only time I would use this probably for filming is if I need to film something very far away, because obviously it goes up to 200mm, which is very, very telephoto, and it's not the type of focal length I would need for a lot of filming situations. It's the type of focal length I'll need for a lot of, photography shooting situations. If I'm shooting pictures of like animals or subjects very far away, I would use something like this because I'd be able to zoom in, a lot on it. And this is a very heavy lens too, so putting something like this on something like the C100 will make things kind of very heavy to work with, but putting something on a lighter camera is a lot more manageable. It's definitely something I'm gonna be able to use a lot going forward, a lot in the future. That's what I kind of try to do when I buy lenses. I know that there are lenses out there that people can probably get for, cheaper, old manual lenses. There's really like a time factor when it comes to those lenses. I don't think those lenses will last very long, for your shooting setup, especially when things are changing so much over the years. You want to keep up to date, with the technology that you have. And something like these, a lot of these lenses, are electronic lenses that have stabilization, they have autofocus built into them. They're solidly made lenses that I know will last a long time. I've had these lenses for at least, 5 or 6 years now. They've really stood the test of time, and they still work just as well now as they used to. As I've said before, I'm not, an expert cinematographer. I'd say I don't do really freelance cinematography work other than weddings or, my YouTube work. I don't get hired for cinematography jobs. Mostly I get hired for editing jobs. I need it for the work that I do personally, and it works for the work that I do personally. In a place like where I work, like a production company where I work for, we have a much more extensive lens selection there because we have cinematographers that work for us there that use that bigger variety of lens setups there and would use that more than I personally would on my projects, for sure. Basically, when you're coming up with a lens, setup for you have to think about the stuff that you're shooting and how many lenses you really need for it, because buying lenses can get really expensive, honestly. Like something like this is like $1,000. Each of these lenses were a few $100s themselves. Pricing for lenses can really, rack up a lot over time. Honestly, I think they're way more expensive than they're really worth. But you really need to think about how many lenses do you actually need. If you're able to cover a lot of the ground that you need with 1 or 2 lenses, I'd say stick with that. Unless you're getting a lot of cinematography business that you're bringing in kind of the business and the money that you can justify paying for more lenses. Having more lenses is going to give you the opportunity to make your work, stronger. Ultimately, it's what you do with these lenses that matters more. But the thing about lenses is when you start to put in prime lenses into your repertoire, you're gonna start noticing things that you can do with them that are completely not possible to do with zoom lenses, just because of the way that they're built. It's not possible to get as shallow a depth of field in the zoom lenses as these. It's just a fact. What I would suggest to do is, you get a camera with a kit lens and then maybe get 1 prime lens to start off with, maybe like a 50mm or a 35mm to start off with. Oh, and Christmas. Birthdays and Christmas. That's a good time to shop for a lens, I'd say. Or tell people that you're interested in lenses. And there you have it. That's about all I had to say about, my lenses here. I'll probably go a little bit more into lenses in the videos in the future. But for now, be sure to like and subscribe. But now you should know I release videos every Thursdays and Sundays, twice a week. My Instagram's also a thing if you want to check it out, see some of my photography, see some of the I've shot with these lenses here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys for the next video. Bye, everyone.